It's the first week of the new year, and I have seen commercials for no less than 6 separate weight loss companies, 5 separate car companies, 4 different fitness programs, 3 different fitness centers, and various other things that we are told to appear better to everyone else. The commodification of the human body has people thinking that they need cool sculpting for the perfect body, gray covering hair dye to hide aging, Botox for a youthful appearance, and all other manner of face creams, tonics, and makeups to hide all of our flaws. We're not even 10 days into 2022, and when you add all of this into the commercialization of New Year's resolutions, all of that added pressure to suddenly make changes in every aspect of our lives, I don't know about you, but frankly, I'm already exhausted. Of course, none of this is to say that one cannot choose to do any of these things. I am 1,000% behind people doing whatever they please with their looks. I've seldom shied away from a full face of makeup or a fresh hair dye myself. But my point here is that the pressure surrounding making changes in the new year is often physically focused and really not particularly healthy. In fact, and correct me if I'm wrong, that pressure can serve to do exactly the opposite of any change that's positive. And after the last 2 years, perhaps more change is not really what we need. We've all experienced great frustrations, disappointments, and losses. So instead of something that might be yet another source of this vast array of soul-crushing feelings, I have no doubt that we have all failed at least once at a New Year's resolution and have quite probably beaten ourselves up about it. I think what we really need, instead of all that noise, is something fulfilling, something sustaining, something we already have the ability and capacity to do. There is a wide-ranging philosophical theory known as self-cultivation. The idea that we as humans are not only capable of our own growth, but duty-bound to engage in it. It is a philosophy found in various cultures in various ways across the centuries. We find interconnected versions of it in Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism, which all in turn have in their own ways influenced some of the Western ideas of it. Nietzsche himself, for example, considered self-cultivation and transformation to be an ethical practice. Unitarian Universalists have their very own special brand of it, thanks in no small part to our Unitarian forebear, William Ellery Channing, a prominent and very well-respected New England preacher. Self-culture, described in his words as the care which every man owes to himself, to the unfolding and perfecting of his nature, is a practice that he considered paramount to the spirit of humans, stating that each one of us is worthy of this work because we are connected to God and his fellow creatures. The idea that we are worth more than the work that we do and deserve more than to toil our lives away. These lives that are inherently ours to live simply because God put us there. Interestingly, while this was a deeply held belief of his, in his address introductory to the Franklin Letters, delivered in Boston in September of 1839, Channing freely admits that it is a complex subject and that he doesn't feel he's adequately covered it in his extensive lecture, which is actually just putting 2 larger lectures together. So naturally, your friendly neighborhood seminarian is going to make it perfectly bite-sized and tangible for you right now. Self-culture can be whittled into 4 categories of being: a moral imperative, a religious necessity, an intellectual pursuit, and of social requirement. The first of these is the moral imperative, the acknowledgement that we each have our own individualistic wants and needs, but that the foundation of our humanity is that we recognize and regard the rights of others and the happiness they get to live. We bend naturally toward the greater good, and it is our duty to become our best selves in order to foster a space for others to do the same. Moral self-culture sets the foundation for growth. Next, we have the religious necessity. Channing was a Unitarian Christian who believed explicitly in a loving God. In his view, we are all here as creatures of God's own making, and our connections in this life and earth are reflections of the divinity within us. When we seek to be our best selves, we seek our divine inheritance, which is interconnected with all beings. Religious self-culture reminds us of our natural holiness. Thirdly, as an intellectual pursuit, not just in learnedness, but the idea that intellect seeks truth, and that it is the responsibility of the truth seeker to not sacrifice morality, nor to pursue intellect just for one's own gain, but in order to share their information with the next generations. Intellectual self-culture calls us to the principles of moral and religious living. Lastly, of social requirement. The previous points all build upon each other in order to make way for the good of society. It takes our human connections into a grounding of spirituality and acts as a practical means towards bettering ourselves and our communities. Social self-culture is all of that work in action. This encouragement in the direction of self-culture is more than just surface changes that are good for us. They are deep, spiritual, and ethical and moral journeys that embody our principles. When we work towards an individual spiritual practice, we're working in the religious sphere. And when we engage in verbal discourse with others, we're working through the intellectual one. Tapestry's work with immigrants and detainees exemplify our moral and social prerogatives towards self-culture. And each of these is indelibly tied to another. The moral and social work feed us spiritually. The spiritual work guides our morality, and all of these are intrinsically linked with our social work, because as Unitarian Universalists, it all comes from the same place. We are in this community together because we seek these things. Channing explains it as thus: the improvement of the soul consists in raising it above what is narrow, particular, individual, and selfish, into the universal and the unconditional. To improve a man is to liberalize, enlarge him in thought, feeling, and purpose. The narrowness of intellect and heart is the degradation from which all culture aims to rescue the human being. In other words, improving ourselves improves the world, and closing our hearts and minds to the universal good is detrimental to our souls. So how does this all tie into renewal? You can think of it as sort of a long-term quest to be our best selves because it is fulfilling of our spirit to do so. And there's no expectation of perfection. Channing is very clear about this. He considers this a successful pursuit for each of us as long as we choose to engage with it. We have the ability within us, and as part of the universe, to become our best selves, and a lot of it is already done in ways that we already engage with as a community, as members of Tapestry, as concerned citizens of our community at large. It asks little of us that we don't already enjoy. We don't need fancy cars, fancy clothes, perfect bodies, or any of that in which to seek completeness. We already have it in us because we are divine beings. We recognize that we are more than ourselves, and we seek to find ways to engage with others and our world because we know there is something greater than just us, and that excites us. We don't need to be told what to improve. We already know it. We live it through our principles, we see it in our sources, and we do it without prompting simply because we are moved to do so. It's a journey, and if we trust ourselves that we already have everything that we need, then we're free to enjoy the steps along the way. And if we do get lost, because sometimes we will, and if we need some guidance, we can rely on those nearest and dearest us to help find our way. Channing requires discourse of superior minds as a method of self-culture. But I think it's a lot deeper than that. We don't need a superior mind, but perhaps one more empathetically inclined, who will challenge us in our moral areas, or one with an alternative perspective in which to engage our intellect. Maybe one with a spiritual path profoundly different from our own in which to enlighten us. Someone doing the social work that scares and discomforts us, encouraging us to grow into the opportunity to challenge the status quo. I like to think that we are living this self-culture every time we worship, from home, from the sanctuary, or even in our silent individual prayers. The beauty of outward creation, Channing says, is intimately related to the lovely, grand, interesting attributes of the soul. Now, Channing does, however, caution against what he calls luxurious excess, and I'm going to disagree with his position just a little bit here, where he considers any search for luxury to be in opposition of a true cultivating of self. Sometimes we need something good just because we need something good. So my advice to you in those instances, on this journey to renewal, especially when the thought of trying to do one more thing exhausts, drink the good wine, eat the cookie, wear the fancy perfume or the nice clothes, use the good crystal. We don't need a special occasion for these things because we're here and we are the special occasion. The work of self-culture, the way that Channing recommends, is really hard work. And I'm not going to pretend that it doesn't take intentionality and a lot of time. Self-culture can't happen overnight, but sometimes it's renewing enough just to treat ourselves, just because we're here and just because we can. So when the last echoes of commercial resolutions make way to flowers and chocolates and little conversation hearts, we'll be left with ourselves, the ones that we already are. That's the ideal time to sit with yourself deeply and ask the nothing and the everything within you what it needs. Where in your life can you enjoy the practice towards self-culture? There are days that we will stumble. The road to our best selves is long, and it may require reprieve and reset. And how lucky we are that we can find it all around us, in the love of our families and friends, in the beauty of nature, in the stirring of art, the quiet within us. There is divinity in us all, even when it feels imperfect. We have everything we need to renew ourselves, always, within us and within each other. Amen.